really started to like see over time is that we could have these really great relationships with our economic buyer. And then next thing you know, they're still canceling. Great. What did you guys talk about? We talked about Netflix. Oh, great. So you didn't talk about the business objectives that they were trying to overcome, right? That's when I started to realize it's not just about the relationship. It's really understanding the strategic outcomes that customer is really trying to drive towards.
Welcome to Customer Unsuccess, the podcast where we cut out the noise and talk with real leaders about their hardest lessons in customer success and other go-to-market motions. I'm your host, Joe DeGrande, and in each episode, we're going to unpack real challenges from real leaders, failed tech implementations, a strategy that didn't yield results, or difficult customers. But more importantly, we're going to take those lessons learned and share them with you so that way you can avoid those same mistakes with your team. So if you're in customer success, sales, or other go-to-market motions, stick around to hear from the best, and let's dig into it. All right, for today's guest, I'm joined with Justin Chappell. He's a seasoned executive, thought leader, and currently a head of digital strategy, CX, and operations. He's also the founder of CSX Innovations, his own consultancy, and a veteran with over 20 years of experience in customer success and customer experience. In this episode, we're going to talk about why strong relationships, while they are important, it's alone not going to help you save a customer account, and how tracking the wrong data can actually hurt your CS programs, and also why real customer success isn't always about customer satisfaction. So great conversation with Justin. Now let's jump into it.
And fly out Friday afternoon.
Fly out Friday. Yeah, that's probably what I'm going to aim to do. But, well, good stuff. Well, thanks for joining the show, Justin.
Yeah, of course. I'm always willing to talk and share kind of my experiences, right? I think that one of the things that I've learned over the years is I learn from others a lot of times, whether it's things that they're doing that's working and being successful, or kind of like what you're trying to talk about today, which is, what are the things that haven't worked, and sharing those with others. Because if you don't, your peers and your network aren't going to be able to take advantage of, the mistakes you've made, and they're just going to make those same mistakes. And in the end, the only person that suffers from that are the customers we all support, usually together in some weird shape or form. We all kind of work together with driving better customer successes across multiple businesses.
100%. And it's a lose-lose. If people don't have this information, whether you're just getting into customer success or sales, customer experience, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today too. Listen, at the end of the day, everything's a learning lesson, which is why we've already experienced those issues in the past, and we're going to share those with everybody. So that way, you can kind of learn from the best. But for those that don't know, Justin's a good friend of mine. He's actually has his own consultancy, CSX Innovations as well. And he's been at, I don't even know, 2-3-time VP at a number of different tech companies and organizations. So great to have him on the show. He's a wealth of knowledge, but again, thanks, Justin. But I'm excited to hear what you got on the docket. So talk to me.
Yeah, well, I was going to say thanks for having me too, and I apologize. Like I said, I came into the office today, so I just started at OneTrust running their digital strategy for customer experience.
Nice.
To help them build that out and really kind of grow that over the next 18 months to really drive a better overall experience for their or not just for their smaller customers, but for all customers, right? It's a true digital strategy. But it's raining in the background. Otherwise, I have this beautiful backdrop for you to be looking at. But unfortunately, it's a little rainy and cloudy today. So, but I appreciate you inviting me here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And listen, I get it. Trust me, if I could, I would be doing the podcast outside, but between landscapers, cars driving by, you know how it goes. You need a little bit more of a controlled setting.
Yeah, for sure. And I was going to say, I think, one of the things that you kind of mentioned is, how do we learn from others, right?
Yeah.
And kind of those things. If I would have learned that earlier in my career, I've been doing this for over 20 years now. I've been leading and managing, teams, right? So I started off very early in my career, more of like the B2C world, working for companies like AT&T and Geico. Very, very different type of management.
Totally.
In terms of like how you're driving customer experiences. And then in the last about 15 to 16 years, really focused more on that B2B software environment and that software piece of it. And I think that, one of the things that I probably have tons of stories of like what I've done wrong. So So maybe I can come back on and talk about more of those. But again, sharing with others, I think, is important about this. But I think early on in my career, especially in the B2B world, it was all about building high, wide, and deep relationships.
Yeah.
Right. So it was like, okay, I want my customers, success managers to go out there and learn every single thing that they can about their customer. What's their favorite baseball team? Where do they like to eat dinner at? What city are they in? They're learning all these little nuances about their customers so that they could use that in conversations to build tighter, deeper relationships. And then we put it all in our CRM, right? So we'd use like Salesforce and we have a notes field and all this stuff, but we never went back and looked at it. But we would still have these good relationships, but we were capturing data that really we never did anything with it. So like right there was a big red flag. Like, all right, if we're going to ask for information, then we should be using it. Right. So I think that's like one of the first things I thought about. But then what I really started to like see over time is that we could have these really great relationships with our like economic buyer. And then next thing you know, they're still canceling. It was like, and then you go and talk to the CSM and you're like, did you like, when was your last check-in? Oh, I check in with them every Monday. Great. What did you guys talk about? We talked about Netflix. Oh, great. So you didn't talk about the business objectives that they were trying to overcome, right? And I think that's when I started to realize it's not just about the relationship. Yeah. It's really understanding the strategic outcomes that customer is really trying to drive towards. Because without that, all I'm doing is I'm making a friend on the other end of the call, but they're still going to fire me if I'm not meeting the objectives or the ROI that they expected to get from our products. Yep. So it was one of those things where we spent all this time building these relationships, but they were still canceling anyways.
Right. No, 100%. I've seen it myself. I mean, I've been in the space now for like 10 years and even going from like the rev ops, CS ops side and actually working a book of business. And at the end of the day, no matter how strong your customer, how strong a relationship is with your customer, if you're not meeting those business objectives, it doesn't really matter. And it's kind of the age old saying, business is business. But I'm curious, like now, so you're building that relationship. You talk about like tracking it in Salesforce, which is great. Like, I think that's, so important. And then it's also, what's interesting, you mentioned, tell me more about like not leveraging it, because again, I'm an ops guy. So like, it's very interesting to hear about like people like they track a ton of data, but then it gets kind of caught up. It's just like in the void, and it's valuable information, but I'm curious about like how you would kind of avoid that just being lost and how you would use it or how you have used it in the past.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think and it's also one that the right CSM will do this in a good way, right? Sure. Like it doesn't come across like it needs to come across authentic. Sure. If not, it comes across cheesy, to be really honest. But like, I have some CSMs that, I mean, I'm a buyer of software, right? So I interact with CSMs on a regular basis. And I have CSMs that when I talk to them will remember things that I'm like, oh, wow, you remembered that about me. Like, yes, I ride a motorcycle, and they're like, hey, have you gotten your bike out out of winter yet? And have you been able to take it out on a ride yet? Like that right there helps tighten that relationship, and it breaks down those barriers for me to then share additional information.
Sure.
A good CSM will make it sound authentic. Now, do they really care if I took my bike out or not? I don't know, but I sure as heck believe that they did, because I ended up talking about it, and it's something that I'm passionate about. And once I have that conversation started, they very quickly pivot and get me to start talking about, so how are those, have we reduced your time to time to first value with, using our product? Like, companies like Gainsight with a CSP, they're asking, how are we doing with our health score monitoring? Have you started to use Journey orchestration to help deliver email at mass? So now all of a sudden they've taken that kind of relationship, like kind of understanding of my personal life, and then quickly pivoted that right into having a good conversation. And they broke down the barrier for me to be like really transparent and honest of like, yes, the product's doing this. Here's where the gaps are still. Here's where my objectives may have changed, because during the sales cycle, I said, here's what I'm trying to get in terms of ROI, or here's my goals. Right. As the year progresses, I'm now 2 years into a contract. My objectives have definitely changed. So how do you go back and revalidate it? That's where a good CSM can use that relationship and leverage it to really start to be able to get that additional information as things change. I think that's the important piece, right? When you get that information, regardless of what it is, like I said, baseball teams, football team, what do they do in their extracurricular activities? Do they have kids? Like that's always like a big thing I think is important to
True.
know, because you can start to tailor messaging in certain ways. Once you have that, don't use it in a cheesy way. Make sure
Yeah.
you're being authentic, because if not, the person on the other end is going to realize that, and it's just going to make more of a barrier than anything. Because it's like, oh, Joe doesn't care about my kids.
Yeah.
He just cares that I signed the contract that's up for renewal in 120 days from now.
Yeah. No, I think you bring up a good point though, right? It's kind of that you don't want to spend too much time where it's inauthentic, but at the end of the day, it's a way to, again, establish that relationship so that way they could open up, right? You could find out like the true objections, right? And I'm a big believer in this, like CS, and then obviously, how it bleeds into customer experience. It's all kind of sales related, no matter what way you look at it, and breaks it down to the psychology. And at the end of the day, if you have your guard up, you're not going to let out the right information. You're going to hide potentially their underlying objections and so on. I'm curious now, like the transition, right? So you talk about the authenticity of developing that relationship. And then of course we have to make sure that the customer is getting value, right? Like making sure that they're being heard, right? It's all, the whole premise is being heard. But then it's like, all right, their day to day, whether that's how their industry is doing, but also more importantly, what about like their actual role? Like I'll give you an example. Sometimes I've been like on the ops side, I've been on the other end of the receiving end of a CSM, and I'm telling them, hey, like, I'm getting pressure from leadership to get this tool to work or whatever. So I'm curious, like how you transition that, how you kind of handle that conversation, because obviously that ties into making sure they're getting the most value, and then so there's no surprises in the end.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of working across teams as well, right? So
Yeah,
to me, it shouldn't, if you're starting to have value conversations with the customer
sure.
after go live or after they've signed the contract, like I'm thinking from a customer success standpoint right now,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Um, you're doing two things. One is you're missing the opportunity to go back and talk to your sales team, who probably already has a lot of this information anyways.
Yeah.
And two, you're basically making the customer re-explain all of the pain that they've already talked about with your sales team.
Yeah.
So to me, if you can get the sales team, and they're already doing it anyways, right? This is how they
Yeah.
move a deal through the sales pipeline, is they identify, the pain. They figure out how they're going to sell for that pain. People buy on emotions. They tell people, they show, hey, this is how we're going to solve this for you. Customer goes in and buys it. If that information, from an ops perspective, you should get this too. If that information doesn't go from the account plan, let's just call it an account plan on the sales side,
Oh yeah.
to the onboarding or implementation plan that the let's say you have a product, like here we have a product that you probably want some services to help you get it up and running. So what happens is that information from the account plan then moves over to the implementation plan. That implementation plan then needs to go directly into the success plan, and that success plan conversation is more about validating or reconfirming those business objectives that customer had, with an understanding that those will change over time. So having a detailed, organized success plan that lives on past the renewal is key. Making sure you have milestones defined within the actual life cycle to say, we know that at 120 days, our renewal paperwork is going to be sent out to the customer. Well, guess what? At 180 days, I should probably be talking about value with the customer, see if their business objectives has changed, so that by the time that renewal paperwork comes out, we're already prepared for the conversations to say, we know, Joe, you're now focused on this new vertical. This new vertical, we're going to help you be able to sell more into it with our products and services. So because of that, we're already proactively having conversations around what life looks like after the renewal. So I think that's where, like, capturing the information early from sales, having it follow through onboarding and implementation, and then ending up in the customer success lap through the success plan, it's all there. It's just tying all those systems together to make sure that it's fluent and the customer doesn't feel the friction that happens. I hate using that word handoff.
Yeah.
It's such a bad word because it makes us all, like, we've all gone through that handoff where we go, oh no, I'm going through a handoff. Like it takes that out of the customer's purview, so that it's just a fluent motion of, I know you've talked with the sales team. This is what I want to validate real quick. Has any of that changed? Nope.
Yeah.
Great. Move and keep moving forward. Don't ask them to rehash it, right? Because that's when that friction becomes there, and they feel like, right hand's not talking to left hand. So the handshake never really happened when the account transitioned.
Yeah, I will agree. I think like that's the biggest, for lack of a better phrase, I mean, we're unfiltered pain in the ass when working with
Yeah.
vendors. I've seen it myself, where you kind of repeating yourself over and over, even in demo calls too. I think that's like the biggest challenge, but it's the way, I think it's the approach that you take, right? I think it's just a matter of making sure that it's not like you're having the same conversation over again, but it goes back to you have to make sure you're aligned. If you're not, anything could change at any point, but go ahead. What were you
At
going to
any
say? Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, like, I think so that's like that's the basics to me, just that transitioning of the
Sure.
information from sales to onboarding to CS. I think that's just like the basics that everyone should be doing. Where I try to really like get in front of the teams here and talk about is, and I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, because if I say personas, like everybody here that's a marketer is going to be like, there's more than
Ooh,
three personas,
I'll
Justin. I'm
forget
like,
it.
I get it. But like, to me, there's really only three personas that my team or the CS organization really is engaged with on a regular basis.
Sure.
It's the end user themselves, right? The day-to-day end user of the solution or the product.
Yep.
There's like usually the power admin, or, the power user, that's your administrator, who's usually, needs a little bit more information than just what the, like that end user needs. And then you have your economic buyer, right? The person that signed the contract, who never actually goes into the product. So you need to make sure that when you're talking about, business objectives and trying to verify the outcomes that you're producing, you need to know whether the business objectives of all three of those different roles that are using your product. Because the role of the end user could be as simple as efficiency, uptime, reliability. The admin is all about, ease of use, administrative reporting,
Yeah.
availability, right? Making sure that things are accurate. And then the economic buyer is all about some type of cost of operations, some type of ROI financial number metric.
Sure.
So when you start to understand that you have these three different roles that you as a CSM need to be engaging with, you need to understand the business objectives of all three of those, and understanding when is the right time to engage with them to talk about those business objectives and when to verify them. Because if you're just kind of using that like shotgun approach, you're really not going to get the level of strategic information or strategic strategy that you need from the economic buyer, because you're just going to be annoying to them, right? So you have to
Yep.
make sure you're very intentional and purpose built when you engage to talk to the economic buyer. Your end user is probably a little bit more frequent, right? You can kind of do some stuff, more digital formats, in app, that sort of stuff. And then your admin is really kind of, how do you build the right level of reporting that you can hand over to them so that they can push it on to the next person and make them look like the superstar, right?
100%.
So it's like you have to understand those three different roles. So that to me is the next level of taking like those business objectives and really operationalizing them within the organization based off of those three different roles.
Yeah, no, 100%. It actually brought back a story that I was thinking about the other day. I was implementing at a company, Churn Zero. I was implementing Churn Zero for a company, and the personas are spot on, right? I had a CRO that was responsible, and CS rolled up to it, then a VP of CS, and then you had your end users, your CSMs, obviously that were using the product, and the goals were all different, right? Like obviously the VP needed them to be efficient. They need to hit their KPIs, whether it was, I think it was net revenue retention or gross, right? And then, but the CRO, totally different perspective where it's like, yeah, sure, we need to hit those KPIs, but we need them to also manage more customers. We have more customers coming in, we're scaling. That's the ultimate goal. Obviously, keeping that under wraps for them. But again, those are two different KPIs. And obviously the CSM just wants to make sure like, hey, I want to make sure I don't go crazy and I can handle my accounts in an efficient manner. So you bring up a solid point. It's bringing up those stories.
Yeah, and I would just kind of close that out with a, like, I always try to think like, don't ever confuse satisfaction with customer success or the success
True.
of the customer. They could be satisfied with using the product from an end user and a power user and admin perspective. Like they could be satisfied with the product and its deliverable, what you're delivering.
Yeah.
But if you're not really truly tying measurable outcomes back to the product itself that are financially like positive for your economic buyer, then you're not successful. So like you have to be able to tie it to all three of those. So never, don't confuse satisfaction with success. You need to be looking across all three of them differently.
100%. No, I think it's a valid point for sure. But I was going to mention something, but I totally forgot. But But at any rate, yeah, no, I think it's definitely important. Oh, that was what it was. Multi-threading. I bring this up a lot. I hear it. I talk to like some junior leaders in the space that are not even familiar with it, but I'm curious, like, I believe it has great importance, but obviously I think it ties into it. But like, what's your take on it?
Yeah, it's huge. I think it's probably one of the most important things that uh, anybody in customer success can do, regardless
Sure.
what your role is. Right? Like, I don't. When I say customer success, like don't think it's always on this customer success manager to
Sure.
do the work. Like, as a leader, as an executive myself, like, I should be just and engaged with some of those strategic accounts and enterprise accounts, helping my CSMs multi-thread and get the
Yeah.
right audience in place. Um, a previous organization I worked at, we sold to chief marketing officers. So we sold to CMOs.
Sure.
And there were some studies that were recently done. I think even now customer success and CROs are similar in this time frame. It's like the average tenure of a CMO is like 18 months. So if you sell a multi-year contract, a 2-year contract, that means within the lifetime
Of
of
that,
that one
yeah.
contract, your most the economic buyer you have, your most important stakeholder in the account is going to leave.
Yeah.
So if you
True.
have not done your job in multi-threading throughout the organization and setting up and getting other champions around that, when that new CMO comes in and they say, oh, well, my last company, these are the products I used, I want to bring them in, you're already having to like reconfirm and redeliver like your value prop. So if you can get internal people to already be having those conversations with you,
Yeah.
it makes it a heck of a lot easier, right? So like that to me is why multi-threading, just knowing that those economic buyers, 18 months multi-year contract, you will lose your economic buyer. You
It's
better be
crazy.
prepared. And if you haven't multi-threaded, then you're already behind the eight ball. I think what happens a lot of times in my experience is really kind of, I've seen this, is that usually that customer success manager sometimes feels awkward
Mm.
kind of jumping over the person that they have that relationship with, and they kind of like they're trying to like multi-thread, and they're always like, oh well, I don't want Sally to get mad at me because I'm reaching out to her boss. Well, then guess what? Lean on me. I'll help you do it. Right. Like
Yeah.
that's where I think as leaders, we need to make sure that we're helping our teams and helping them and empowering them to do it themselves. But if they get that block and they feel that resistance, that's what my job's for too. Like,
Right.
let me help you. So I think that's important too, is that, like, to me, multi-threading is not just the responsibility of the customer success manager themselves. It's all of our responsibility to try to help get to that level, because we know how important some of those roles are when it comes to being put on the chopping block, time of budget. Are they
Yeah.
going to say yes or no? We want to make sure that we're not on that chopping block at that point in time.
100%. I think it's also too finding the right people that have, the right level, I guess, essentially like political say, right? Capital. Because like at the end of the day, one, are they getting value from it? But also two, like, can they go up to bat for you? And I think it takes a lot of time, right? Because it ties in going back to the beginning, right? That relationship building, but still bringing in, making sure that you're finding people that are gaining value of the product, with whatever use case, and they kind of do the selling internally to make sure. Then obviously that helps mitigate churn risks, whether it's you lose that initial decision maker or point of contact, or better yet, if that point of contact is totally removed, that economic buyer that's just not in the platform, is just like signing the contract, you have someone to kind of do that internal selling. But yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
point.
And the one thing, just to kind of maybe put a pin in the multi-thread, especially knowing the
Yeah.
10-year conversation we just had, is, from a CX and an operations perspective,
Yeah.
make sure you're running two plays on that buyer leaving or main contact leaving, because you should be running two different plays. One is, how do I enable the person coming in to the
Yep.
organization, and making sure that we're bringing all of the value conversations to them, but also make sure you're tracking that person that was there before. Where did they go? Because if you've done all the right things already, they were probably already an advocate for you. When they go to leave to their new position and their new role, bring you
100%.
along on that journey with you, right? So you
Of
should be
course.
running two distinct playbooks when you have that main contact, churn play. You should be, how do we enable the person coming in, but how do we track the person going out and making sure they bring in along that journey as well?
100%. Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too, right? Like they'll take it kind of even goes back to the CMO example, right? Like if they were happy with an experience with another vendor, whether that's the relationship or the tool, you make them happy there wherever they go. You already
Yep.
develop that relationship, which is key. It's funny. I actually like going back. This is 8 years ago now. I remember a leader had told me when it came to multi-threading, and I still do it today. Like when working with people or like advising people, and I think it does work. I don't know the data on it, but I think it's a good benchmark. Is where if your contract is, let's say, it's $20,000, right? It's a $20,000 contract. For every $10,000, you should be having at least two additional, whether it's influencers, whatever account role that you have identified to multi-thread, two contacts for every 10,000. I will say, like when we put that strategy into place, years ago, we had never lost a churned account from not having like a decision maker. And so, and it
Yeah.
works. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great point because, I'll say it in a different way, right? Because, my math isn't always like perfect. So I'll probably screw that part up if I use the dollar value as it relates to ARR. But the way I would actually talk about it is think about what the buying committee was when you
Yeah.
initially sold that deal. When you
Mm,
initially sold that deal, that buying committee on average is usually like 3 to 4 people, sometimes five. There was one of the
right.
companies I was most recently at. We did this analysis and figured out, okay, well, how many people need to be considered part of the buying committee to know that that deal is more likely to close? And our AEs would go out and they would make sure that they had each of the roles associated with it. At the renewal, it was actually double digits. It could be as high as 10 or 11 people because what would happen is over the life of that contract, you're now you're basically moving into other parts of the organizations.
For
So
sure.
we would sell to the CMO, we would sell to the CRO, we could sell, to the operations manager. All of them, the CTO would now be part of that conversation because we now have multiple products. The companies, they've bought multiple products from us, multiple different stakeholders. Now they're having these other people are part of that renewals conversation that were never part of your initial conversation that you had for the net new business. So
Right.
when you think about your buying committee can almost double in size as your product becomes more threaded throughout the company,
Yep.
so should your engagement in having multiple stakeholders aligned to that account as well. So kind of the same thing, right? As
Yeah.
the ARR goes up, they're probably buying more products, right? They're
Exactly.
buying more services. They're investing more in your organization. There's more stakeholders on that customer side. If you're not going out and identifying who they are, by the time when you get to the renewal, it's too late. You're in a
Oh,
competitive
100%.
state with your customer at that point. And you don't
Yeah.
want to be there. You should be doing all that work up front. So those
Yep.
renewals become non-events, and that's where multi-threading, understanding who your champions are, who are those true economic buyers, really, really add a ton of value. If you do it right and you do it up front and you tie everything back to value outcomes, than if you are worried about, just building relationships.
Awesome. No, 100%. But listen, I think we're coming up on time here, but Justin, this was an awesome session. Definitely, I think we have plenty of other stories that we could talk about things that didn't go well in customer success, experience, and sales. But I'm curious, like, as like final send off, like, what are you doing in the space? Any shout outs and where can everybody find you?
Yeah, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn, right? I'm on LinkedIn, Justin Chappell, right? I think I'm like one of the only that are on there. Definitely follow me. Definitely reach out. I'm always happy to talk people. I do, like I said, I do own my own company as well called Customer Success Experience Innovation, CXX Innovations. Doing consulting work, but I also do executive coaching, right, and career coaching. I think that one of the most important things that we should be investing in is ourselves. If you want to go to the gym and lose weight, you usually get a trainer. If you want to get better in your finances, you get an accountant. If you,
Yep.
you have problems with relationships, you go see a counselor. But in the business world, we always try to do it by ourselves. There's people that are out there that will help you with that, whether it's through coaching or mentoring. There is a little bit of a difference between the two. But I do offer, executive coaching as well. So if anybody's ever looking for anything, happy to reach out, happy to have a conversation. If it's not me, my network's pretty deep. I can always help find somebody for you as well. But I think that, the one thing I would say just in closing is,
Yeah.
as leaders, we all make mistakes, right? It's important, but it's how we react to those and how we learn from those. So
Yes.
it's, Joe, you putting on sessions like this where people talk about the things that we've done in the past that really just didn't work out properly, I think is important, right? So we can learn from those as leaders, or as, individual contributors. We can learn from the others' mistakes is only going to make us that much better. So I appreciate you putting this on, and don't for those out there, don't be afraid to try things, make mistakes, learn from them, and push forward. And we'll do great things.
100%. No, you hit the nail on the head, Justin. I really appreciate that, that wrap up. But we'll put the links in the description. But at any rate, hopefully, I'll see you at Pulse. But thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, just hope wish me some better weather this week, because I did want to get my bike out this week, and with the weather the way it's looking, it's not happening. So
I hear you on that. Well, hopefully it'll clear up. Thanks so much, Justin.
All right, thank you, Joe. Have a good one.
All right,
Bye-bye.
You too. That's a wrap for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening. If you got some value from this conversation, hit subscribe, leave a rating and review, and share it with someone who's also out there trying to build a better customer success or go-to-market strategy, even if it's messy along the way. And if you want more frameworks, tools, automated playbooks, check out jodastouch.com and subscribe to our newsletter. That link is in the description. Thanks so much for being here. Keep building, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one. Quick note before we wrap. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions shared here are of my own or those of my guests, and don't reflect the views of any current or former employers, clients, or partners. We might reference tools, platforms, or companies, but nothing shared here should be taken as fact, endorsement, or criticism. Do your own research and always consult your team or legal counsel when making any business decisions. This content is not legal, financial, or business advice. It's just us sharing what's worked, what hasn't, and how we've learned from both. So thanks again for joining us. We'll see you next time.